Welcome to the Filmmaker's Playbook. My name is Jason Branagan and this is a podcast all about filmmaking. On today's show, I talked to production designer Lauren Kelly. Lauren was the production designer on the internationally acclaimed feature film, You Are Not My Mother. Other feature films include Claire Dix's Sunlight, Damian McCarthy's ODDITY and Marian Quinn's TWIG. Upcoming releases include Visitation and September Says, which premiered at Cannes. In our conversation, we talk all things production design and look at the hierarchy of the design department, how Lauren got started as a designer, how she begins to design a film, working with directors to realise a vision, and the importance of collaboration, and much more. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you for listening. Lauren Kelly, how are you?
Hello, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining me. I can't wait to talk to you about all things design.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. This is my first podcast, so I'm really excited to get into it as well.
Excellent. Well, look, let's dig straight in. So to begin, I was hoping that maybe in your own words, you might be able to tell us all what a production designer is and what your job actually entails for anyone who doesn't know.
So the production designer's job is to basically visualize the story that the director is trying to tell. So, we'll take words off the pages of a script and come up with the kind of visual concepts of, the film or the TV show or whatever the production is that you're on. In a nutshell, we design, we'll select all of the locations that we fit or see fit to the characters or the space that we're in certain scenes. So designing from locations or, building sets in studios, we're kind of, determining the overall look and feel of the film. We work closely with the director, closely with the DOP, the costume designer. We kind of collaborate with all of the different HODs of the film and kind of come up with what, who the characters are, what do their spaces look like, what are we trying to make the audience feel in those certain moments. So what color palettes will we use, to kind of display certain emotions, or what kind of, props do we want? What couches would this person sit on? We think about all of the different things that visually tell the details of the story to the audience that, may not be captured by words, and kind of enhance the overall feeling of different scenes through visual aesthetic and kind of design.
When you get a script and you start reading, is that a case of just letting images and textures swirl through your...
Yeah, totally. It's crazy. It is actually crazy when you read a script and it's just words on the page, and there's like 100 pages or 90 pages, and you go through, like, naturally now at this stage, I kind of can see the film as I'm reading the words. And it's not to say that it ends up looking like what I've, captured in my mind as I'm reading the script, but I have like gut feelings when I'm reading, certain scenes that may, be set in a hospital, but, you kind of see different colors and see if there's a lot of negative space, or, or if there's a lot of clutter in detail just by descriptions of the characters, or kind of how, if they're a chaotic and messy person, you just start to see that space or the environment that they're in. So I think, you definitely see everything as you're reading the script. Then I guess you go off and take it and you see more and more as you're kind of visual, like you're researching. When I read scripts kind of straight after, I'll go onto the laptop and I'll start to, look at films that script reminded me of, or remembering like locations I had seen before in a script or in a film. And I use kind of like websites like Film AI or Shot Deck or Pinterest, and I'll kind of develop further based off the kind of initial reactions that I had in my head. I usually, when I read scripts, I will have a notes app or a Google Docs like side by side, and I'll just type in, all the initial gut reactions that I had or questions that I have, ideas, piecing things together at the same time. Then I'll take those notes and I'll go straight online with those and get the visual kind of references that match the ideas and the thoughts that I've had, and I'll put it all in one document as one kind of like brain dump. I just put all the initial feelings and everything that I'm thinking to do with the film or the script, and kind of put it all into words and then visualize it afterwards.
I will come to the idea of how you then take all of that and how that then begins to translate into conversations you're having with directors and DOPs and heads of department, because my guess is there probably then becomes a negotiation around your initial instincts to the film versus maybe what a director is seeing for the film, and looking for the places where your ideas and their ideas compare and contrast.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's kind of like budget aspects as well that you have to take into consideration once you get further down the line. But it's funny, like I start big and I start dreaming, and then you pare back in terms of like budget, or you navigate it towards a certain direction that maybe a director will feel really strongly about. But I think ultimately, like I love the first conversation with the director, because it's always just such a nice clarification over which way and which route they want their story to go, and it's kind of refreshing. You can then build from that.
Before we start to dig into that stuff in more detail, can you talk to me about the hierarchy within the design department and what the buildup of your team is?
So there would be, I guess, the production designer is the head of the art department, but there's a few other HODs within my department that would have their own departments themselves. So the key HODs would be your art director, and the art director would kind of head the art department and oversee the production of, graphics, schedules, action vehicles, so many things, set builds, all of that. Then you would also have a set decorator. Set decorators would then head the set decoration department, and they would have their buyers, petty cash buyers, trainee buyers, and they'll have their own team of people who buy the props and decorate the sets. Then you have a prop master who heads the props team, and they're in charge of kind of overseeing dressing sets, striking sets, scheduling, what goes where, and delivering of props from the prop houses to sets and things like that. On bigger jobs, I haven't gotten there yet, but you would have like supervising art directors, art department coordinators, set designers. The art department is such a big department, and there's so many, the bigger the budget, the more that needs to be done and the more crew there is. But ultimately your key crew, like your HOD team, they're so crucial to getting the job over the line and getting things done, and meeting all of the deadlines, and then striking, those sets. And there's a lot of, parts to it. And that would kind of be the hierarchy of how it goes. And then, in the art department, you would have the art director, graphic designer, art department trainee. I think that's kind of it in a nutshell.
You have a lot of links, I guess, in that chain to make sure your department is running smoothly and things are done properly. How important is the communication aspect of the job? And was that a skill you naturally had going in, or something that you had to learn as you grew in that department?
I think it's definitely something that comes naturally to me. I actually remember when I was studying production design in college, I remember I think it was like my first year in college, my final hand up was you kind of had the option to make films or a piece of theater that you would then perform in the kind of final show. And I remember kind of coordinating everything. So I had coordinated like a DOP, producers, costume hires, we had projections. There was a lot of kind of organizing of other people to create these things and come on board the project and collaborating with them. And I remember my tutor at the time once I had handed it up, he was like, "You were kind of supposed to do this yourself." And you've like very naturally coordinated and like collaborated with other people and made it happen with a greater team than kind of what you were supposed to do. And I mean, like it was all good, but I do just remember that sticking out to me as like, oh, that was a natural thing that happened, kind of creatively collaborating with people, and then everybody was on the team making this thing, the best that it could be. So I do think collaboration does come naturally to me, and thank God, because the entire job is collaboration. You're collaborating with your own team, the entire team that you're working with, and trying to convey in words what is in your head or convey with images. So being clear and understandable in that sense is one aspect, and then constantly updating if we're choosing wallpapers and things need to be chosen by the end of the day, and this other person needs answers on this, and just collaborating in that sense practically is really important, and keeping on top of everything and keeping everybody in the loop. If, say, for example, I get a email from a director that, this new thing he's seen or she's seen on a film that they watched and they'd love to try and incorporate it, or actually they're thinking about blue instead of pink, or like anything, it could be anything, collaborating with them on that new idea, and then going back to your team and being able to tell them almost immediately so that things can get in motion, or if schedules change. Like there's so many different ways that you're collaborating with people practically, creatively, and I don't think any show would go on the road if you weren't all collaborating to the best that you can. It's really important, and if you have good collaboration skills and good communication skills, the whole thing kind of goes a lot smoother and you get the best results. Things are done, finished, completed ahead of time. And I think when there's a miscommunication or when there's a breakdown in communication, the knock-on effect is so big, or can be so big sometimes, that it really just does highlight like how good it is when you are communicating well, when your team is kind of collaborating with each other as well, and having those kind of communication skills. Yeah, it's what makes it or breaks it, really.
I love what you said about keeping people in the loop and sharing all that information. Sometimes I think people might play things or can play things a little too close to their chest, and things end up falling down the cracks. And I think, in my experience, being totally transparent is usually the best way to make sure everyone is on the same page and rowing in behind you.
Yeah, totally. I like to just get things off the desk straight away. So like if things come in, I share it with the people that need to know immediately, so that it's off my desk and it's in motion and it's being done, and I don't sit and wait on it. And it could be forgotten because you're thinking about so many things during a day. Like I'm talking, I guess, specifically on like when you're on a feature film, you're collaborating with so many different people, updating so many different people about different things. You just have to, once it comes in, get it off the desk and straight into the hands of the person who needs to know, or, get the group together that need to have the conversation so that it's done, it's sorted. It's not a last minute thing.
You mentioned studying production design. So if we were to go back even to before college, where did your interest in film and television and becoming a designer stem from?
So my granddad was a director for all of his life. He worked in like live TV in RTE back in the 70s, kind of starting off as like a floor runner and worked his way up into the box. And he's also an artist, and I think it runs in the family because his two daughters, so my mom and her sister, my mom works as in the set decoration department as well as a buyer, and her sister's in production living over in LA. So it kind of runs in the family a little bit. And I remember always doing theater. Like I did theater when I lived up in the Wicklow Mountains, and I would do like variety group theater, up in Roundwood, and like put on plays and musicals and things like that. But I would always kind of watch the people who were making the sets. I remember even when I was in secondary school, I was in drama group there, and one of my friends' moms, she was an incredible painter, and she would come and paint the sets for plays that we were putting on in school. She's so sweet. She always remembers that me kind of sitting, waiting to be collected, and like just watching her, chatting to her in the school hall where we would be making the sets, just watching her paint. And I think that's, yeah, really lovely to look back on. But I guess transition year then, when I was in secondary school, I had to do work experience. My granddad got me work experience in RTE, so I was on Winning Streak, I think it was, talking to the set designer about her inspiration for the set. And then I was on Fair City, just kind of being, work experience. And then I think it was when I was in the end of transition year, my mom brought me to an open day in IADT, and we went to DSS, which was designed for stage and screen. And I think either it was the grad show or the open day, I can't really remember, but I saw basically everything. I saw the costume design, I saw the makeup design, I saw the set design and sets that people had made, concept art for the worlds that they were building. And I was just like, immediately, I think I was like 16, I was like, this is absolutely what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And then it's kind of been one track minded since then. Like, really, I think I did my portfolio course summer the year after, like in 5th year, and did my portfolio for production design. Production design was the only thing I put on the on the CAO. And then after the one course, which was design for stage and screen, there was 5 portfolio courses after that to get in to production design the next year. And then when I was in college, I kind of knew immediately, like, I do love theater, and I love going to the theater, but I know I prefer designing worlds for film. I just kind of, going back to the gut reaction, like, I just, in my gut, or in my, heart, the film industry and making pieces of film.
I feel like film is probably a much more expansive palette for a designer to work within as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think for me as well, there's a team that you can work with. Not to say that there's not a team in set design for theater, but you really do get a good chunk of team and a good chunk of money to work with, and that allows for bigger scope of the worlds that you're designing, access to so many. And I think it's going back to kind of creative collaboration. I really do lean on my team, and I love having a big team of really clever, creative people, because you just, when you're in the art department, you're just kind of coming up with ideas, and there's so many creative sparks kind of flying. So I really do love having a solid team. But I guess, yeah, I like designing for a frame. I just more naturally gravitate towards that aspect of set design, work creating for. I like the structure as well. I like how everything's quite methodical. You shoot things in blocks or in little, chunks, rather than one long lead up to a show as such. I like having the bite-sized aspect of filmmaking once you get practically into the production. But yes, so then I was in college, and I naturally gravitated towards the film school. So I became good friends with all the people that were in my course or my year or the year above, and started kind of like double, triple jobbing, like doing my own production design course, and then at the same time working with all of the film students on the films that they were making. And I just kept practicing working. Then when I was in like 2nd year or 3rd year, actually in the film industry as a trainee, on commercials. I started off in commercials, working for other designers and just kind of like learning. And at the same time doing college work and working with the film students, I started putting everything up on Instagram. And then from there, it just kind of took off. I did, started designing short films for filmmakers that had gotten in touch on Instagram that weren't part of, that were working in the film industry, music videos for proper production companies, and just built my portfolio while I was in college. And then I left in 2020, and a couple of months after I left, I got an email to design You Are Not My Mother, which was with Kate Dolan. And I was just like, yeah, fuck it, let's go. And I, took on, the challenge. I'd never worked on a feature film before. I'd done, in fairness, like 3 years worth of short films, music videos, commercials, and kind of creatively collaborating with the film students. So there was a lot of practice there, but that was definitely my first step into narrative feature film making. And another thing I will say about growing up is I've only kind of reflected on this recently. I used to make, me and my friends, like when I lived up in the Wicklow Mountains, we kind of were living in, there was a lot of like forests and fields and trees and things like that. So we would play in the forests for a large part of the day, and we would be making like fairy houses or little houses for ourselves and kind of world building in that sense. And then at home we would have like this big long dining table set up in the playroom, and on top of it we would just be kind of creating cities with Lego and kind of like floor plans with walls and bathrooms and having like slides. And like just kind of like looking back, I realized that I did definitely gravitate towards world building or designing spaces. Even as a child, it was something that I was interested in doing. I feel like my whole life is just going to be production design, like with how things have been going since 16 or 17. It's just been so one track minded in terms of just constantly getting excited about creating worlds for a certain project or,
I, first and foremost, love the idea of that kind of one-track mind. I know there can be pitfalls to that mindset now and again, but I think in an industry like this, you have to be focused,
yeah,
while also still being adaptable to figure out how you fit in to that
yeah,
place.
totally.
In terms of IADT in school versus quote unquote the real world,
Yeah.
I would love to get a sense of how important the education part of design was. It sounds like you found a way to kind of marry being in education with consistently putting that into practice and testing what you were learning by working with those film students as well, which I think is
Yeah.
vital. I'd love to get your take on that, on how the education side of design in IADT prepared you, or possibly at times didn't prepare you for what the real world of being a designer was when you're out there and you're freelance in what can be a crowded marketplace.
I think the one thing that my course really set me up for was the amount of time that you need to put in from your own life to projects. Like in DSS, like when we were studying like for 4 years, we'd be kind of working project based, so project after project. And you had kind of had the same process. I really learned the process of starting from a script, breaking it down, coming up with concepts, prop sourcing, managing how much money you had to spend on it. Then when you're in like crunch time, like in the few weeks leading up to the deadline, your like caretakers were kicking us out of our classrooms and or the studio spaces, and like, or the security guys would come and like knocking on windows to tell us to go home. And then I'd travel back to Wicklow and back in the next day for 8 and start again. And I do think I kind of consumed myself in college while I was in it. I wasn't really too interested in going out and partying all the time. I also frankly didn't have that much time because it was so much of it was taken up by the work that I had to be doing. And that's quite similar to how it is now as well, so in that sense it really set me up for how much dedication I had to put into the job, because you really do have to put a lot of work into the job. The end product is a result of how much work you've put in. So you can give as much as or as little as you want, depending on how good of an outcome you want it to be. From that aspect, there's quite a lot of similarities between college and the real world. It really set me up from a mindset perspective. And then also practically, just like hard skills, 3D modeling, understanding how to visualize a space in a 3D sense. Also creatively, like brainstorming, like they really taught us to push an idea as far as it can go and then like pare it back where, you need to, or where you see fit. There was a load of opportunities that I got from IDT, actually, in fairness, like that really stand to me today. And kind of, I put in practice team building. We would be put in groups of, teams. It was kind of like a mini real world in the sense that how we were taught is exactly very similar to how it is in the real world. But yeah, I got loads of opportunities from IDT. I studied in Helsinki. I went away for half a year. I wish it was a year. I should have, in hindsight, I would have loved to stay for a year. But I chose half a year, and I was put in a master's course. And Finland, they just do it right. Like there's so much. I think I might be wrong. Don't quote me on this, but it seemed like a lot of funding went towards the colleges there and towards education there, because just the amenities that they had, like we had full construction workshops specifically for production design and the film school there. And it was a master's course as well. So everybody was kind of at the top of their game. I think I was 20 in a master's course, and everybody was just kind of like already in the film industry. So I think that's where it really kicked in. Like the first or second year, I was kind of, doing my projects and, making art. And then I did this course, or I did this Erasmus, and saw, I was with people that were so mature. I was with people that were already working in the film industry and just knew their shit. And I was like, okay, I have to step it up a little. And then I came back and I had 2 more years in IDT, and now I've just been in the film industry since.
So before we get to You Are Not My Mother, I would love to just pick your brain a little bit on some of your early jobs as a designer and maybe some of the narrative shorts. And we don't have to necessarily talk about any specific film unless there's something that was a really pivotal moment for you. But I'm curious just as to how those experiences then began to shape you and what the learning process was like, and what those early shorts began to teach you that maybe school didn't, to prepare you for moving into the world of features.
I think the main thing for me, once I started doing like Screen Ireland short films and, started to do more than what I was doing in college, or even just kind of the one day music videos or commercials that I would have done, I guess the idea of a schedule was introduced, and bigger scope of a film, bigger scope of a project, more characters to think about, more sets. I think in comparison to college, there was just a lot more moving parts, actual team, once I had actual team working with me and could see how, beneficial having incredible crew members on your team is, it kind of just, it definitely changed in that sense. It was more of a production really, and more of, an actual proper breakdown of crew. And
I don't necessarily like to harp on about this idea of mistakes, but I think we learn more from things that go wrong than things that go well. And in those early kind of shorts and that your early experiences in that narrative world, were there any big pivotal learning points for you, or mistakes that were maybe made that you're like, I'm never going to make this mistake again, or this didn't work here and I can correct it moving forward by changing my process? Or
yeah, for sure. Like when I was first starting off, once a costume designer once said something to me in terms of like leveling up. I think the conversation was around having good mentors, or like, doing your research or something like that. I can't remember. But she said, just in regards to like stepping up, you don't know what you don't know. And that has stuck with me so much. Like when I think about decisions that I made on films a few years ago, I mean, obviously everybody's the same, we all grow and learn. And I do think genuinely that every day is a learning day. And a line producer said that to me once, and it's also stuck with me. Like I learn something new every single job that I'm on, every single, even on short jobs. And I think it's because you are every world that you design is different. Every character is different. Their background, their motive, their environment, their level of income. Like there's so many different things that are constantly changing job to job. You have to use and flex so many different muscles and learn about so many different things to do with the character or to do with the film that you're creating or the world that you're creating.
I love what you said, or what the costume designer said to you. You don't know what you don't know. And I think that's such an important piece of advice for anyone in any field, actually, because we need to be able to rethink what we do frequently. Just because it's something on one job doesn't mean it will work on the next one.
Yeah, totally.
And if you're not reevaluating your beliefs or processes regularly, you probably will cease to grow as well and get better.
Yeah. You don't know what you don't know. It's a great quote. And I think about it often. Like I really do think about it often because, I think as I'm starting to work with bigger budgets, more experienced people, I'm learning so much from them. I learn so much from the crew that I work with and also my team, because they may have done, like, say we're doing a period piece, they may have done that era before on another job with another crew, and what they can bring knowledge wise to, that production. I value it so much, and I learn so much from the people that I work with, every day completely. You learn so much, but then looking back on jobs that you would have done before and like decisions you would have made then, it is just interesting, and it's kind of worrying because it's like, what am I doing now that in 5 years I'll look back on and be like, you know what I mean?
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, actually, because I don't think anyone looks back on work and thinks to themselves, yeah, fucking nailed it. It's all.
No. No, I'm always constantly questioning my decisions on things from the start, or things, when I look back on, jobs that I've done, not constantly. Like, of course, I hold so many of the films that I made, or short films or music videos at the start of my career. I hold them so, close to my heart. But I can just, see when I look back things that I've now learned, since working on bigger films and for a few more years and with more experienced crew. I can, just see the holes in my whatever it was, looking back.
I think that's important as well, though, because one, you get to look at work and go, I have got better and I have grown, and that's important.
Yeah.
And two, if you are unable to look at your work objectively and critically, you will never get better.
Yeah. That's a very good way to look at it. I agree.
So when it came then to getting a call to step up and make You Are Not My Mother, which was your first feature, what were the challenges of stepping up into the world of feature films? At that point, did you feel entirely ready? Were you daunted by the task at all? What was that situation like for you?
I think at the time I thought maybe, look at it as if it's a load of short films back to back, almost. That's kind of how I think my thought process was back then, to not make it daunting, and to not make it scary. And I think at that time I had been working like flat out for a year on so many different projects all at the same time, kind of overlapping each other. And I think I had thought, it would be similar to that. I'd never done something that was as long, 5 weeks prep, 4 week shoot or something like that. But I also think it was kind of refreshing to be able to work with one team on one project for that amount of time and not split my brain up into 4 parts. So from a world building perspective, that was a kind of a bit of a breakthrough moment for me, because I was like, oh, whoa, I can give this so much time and I can really get into the characters and get into their psyche and have the time to explore and play with, different options of, routes we could go or ways that we could tell this story. I think, interestingly, looking back on You Are Not My Mother, for me, I was so focused on the production design aspect and making sure that that was, super cohesive. And I guess what I learned on that one was you're designing the entire film, and the whole thing has to have a certain visual tone and a cohesive style to it. The entire film itself is a piece, and it's not, little tiny chunks like a one day music video or, things like that.
If we were to stick with that film, just for context, we touched on your process kind of with scripts, but when it comes to actually breaking down a script and really, I guess, starting the hard prep, how does that practically commence once you are attached and you've booked the gig?
I guess I get the email. I get an email or a call from a producer. And so specifically on You're Not My Mother, I guess I'll say I got an email from one of the producers, and, you kind of book an interview / meeting with the director after you've been given some time to read the script, and kind of like what I was saying before, you make your own notes. And I always make a lookbook to kind of accompany the words that I'm saying. And I find it's a really good way to get your point across when you're speaking with the director and you're kind of brainstorming, different types of whatever it is that you're talking about. I always find it's really, really helpful to have a lookbook with me. So I can kind of specifically show almost what I'm kind of saying. And for me as well, making a lookbook maps out your whole design. Like, I really do design through mood boards and through piecing different images together and colors that work together on the page. And so I would bring a lookbook to an interview.
When you bring that lookbook, how in depth have you gone at that stage in terms of, because I think it's always a challenge to, you want to have a certain amount of prep and a lot of good ideas, but you haven't been hired or you're not being paid to do it. So how far will you go in terms of building out that lookbook? How big is that? Does it depend on the film?
Yeah, totally. Like, I think for You Are Not My Mother, it might have been like 15 pages, maybe like 13, 14. And the most recent lookbook I just put together for an interview was like 55. So I guess it depends on what I usually do when I'm putting lookbooks together is I'll, naturally you'll, from reading a script, you'll be able to see or read what the big scenes are, what the main spaces are, and I'll put them into the lookbook. I'll break it down in terms of key scenes, key spaces, chronologically, so that the director can get a feel for how I'm, in order of the film. They can kind of almost visually see the film chronologically as to, how it is in the script. And I find that's really helpful. It's just quite nice because it kind of feels like you're reading the script again, but you're visually seeing it through the lookbook.
Love it.
Yeah, so I would, that's kind of how I would break down a lookbook, and I'll put color palettes in, texture references, maybe key moments in the film that aren't necessarily to do with production design. That's another thing I will say is that, like, recently, in the last 2 years or so, I can see filmmaking a lot more than just to my own department, which is quite nice. So I can understand, through the cinematography and the DOP's work, how that can influence a film and how it can influence how I design films. And I'll have those kind of things in mind when I'm putting the lookbook together. I might even throw some costume in there, just so we can get a really overall sense of the world that we are creating and the story that we're telling.
We talked about it before we started recording, but there's something like that has to be symphonic in film. It's like an orchestra, and if someone is playing in the wrong key, you may not be able to pinpoint exactly where it is, but something will feel off and feel wrong.
Yeah, totally. In prep, I like to kind of make sure that everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet. I really enjoy prep. It's so nice. You're just kind of creatively dreaming about what you can create together and having meetings with I just did a movie called September Says, and the initial prep on that, like myself, the DOP, the director, and the costume designer, we would meet and read through the script together and go through and just brainstorm creatively every single page, every single set, every single costume. I think that one was so particular because it was a quite artistic film. Like it was a really creative film, and every frame was so important because every frame is quite locked off. So the things like lighting on a texture on a costume against a wallpaper that I was choosing, we would be holding on that frame for quite some time, and every single thing within that frame held such importance to what we were trying to tell the audience in that moment in the film. And prep on that and communication between the four of us was so refreshing, because it was just really, four hungry artists that wanted to create a piece of art, which was this film. And it was nice having everybody singing off the same hymn sheet on that one. And like you can see it in the film completely that, we really gelled together as artists, and we were all singing off the same hymn sheet and making the same film. I could really see that we were all the creatives on that film. We were all making the same film.
What you just said about everyone making the same film, I know this should seem like a really obvious thing, but it's incredible the amount of people who you can speak to, and at some point in financing a film or prep or production, people haven't been quite aligned, and it can lead to trouble in post and in the edit when two or three people think they're each making a slightly different film. With that in mind, you mentioned on September Says you were all singing off the same hymn sheet. It's rare, I think, everyone happens to have the exact same ideas immediately and you all come together and it's all harmony. There is a process, I think, of kind of getting everyone aligned. So I was going to ask you, when it comes to that kind of alignment process or the collaborative aspect of this developing the design for a film, how has that process worked for you? Or another way of maybe putting it is, how do you like to work with directors? What's that relationship and communication space like?
Nice. Good question. Really, it is, you just talk, like, like you just talk it out. Everything to do with the film. You start with, I guess, the broader strokes is where you start first. Like you talk about the overall feelings of the characters and the feeling of the film and what the messages are in the film and who these people are, where they come from, if it's a film about people or a certain person. Then after you finish with the broad strokes, I like to talk about each space in the script and in detail what this space looks like in their mind, different colors that could be potential, like, getting into all of the kind of nitty-gritty details of each space in the film. Then after that, we kind of start location hunting, and that's really where everything really starts, when you're met with the realities of what you have available to you and what kind of opportunities you have. And I think location managers are so important when this, part of the process starts. Yourself and the director, I've been on movies where we look at 15 different options for one space, you know, just to make sure that it's right. And I really enjoy location scouting because you're kind of standing in the space and more communication happens then, you know, you're really talking about how this space lends itself towards the story or opportunities of framing a certain thing in a certain way to that's really where all the ideas start to spark. You know, everybody is kind of chipping in and it's a real lovely kind of collaborative brainstorming process standing in the space itself. Usually then it'll be either myself, the director, um, a producer or the DP sometimes as well will be kind of early days scouting and obviously the location manager as well. And yeah, you kind of just map out the film piece by piece, space by space. And then once they're chosen, and like while you're scouting as well, you're kind of framing up. I use an app called Artemis where you can input like your aspect ratio, what camera, what lenses, everything, so that it's really specific. Because I guess at the end of the day, each film, you know, has different aspect ratios for certain reasons, certain feelings that we're trying to create. Again, you know, just visual language. And then you input that into Artemis and you can kind of frame up and see it exactly how it's going to look on camera, which is really helpful. I think the app's like €30 or something, but you have it then forever. And I find it so useful because you can waste so much money as well designing for something that's never going to be seen. I remember when I first started off in the film industry, an art director told me that expect to see about 70% of what the art department makes because either the other 30 won't be seen in shot or it doesn't make it into the cut sometimes. And you kind of just have to take that as it is. And
I've had that before where I haven't been clear where a camera is going and I will my mistake and we end up dressing a wall that's behind the camera.
Yeah, totally. And that wall could have cost you a couple of $100 out of your budget when, you know, you could have a sick action vehicle instead or whatever it is, you know, money. I think that's really what I'm learning so much in the last couple of years is that being clever with your budget spending and being clever with where you put your money is so important. Like not to waste, like it's so soul destroying wasting money on something that's never seen or doesn't have any purpose in the end. We'll map everything out in prep and then you start to put mood boards together of kind of how you are seeing each space individually. So once you see the location and you understand the space and understand visually like what's going to be seen, you then take it home and I'll take photos once we're in the space on the scout. I'll take photos of the entire room, like 360 kind of wide angle shots of everything. And then I'll kind of go in more to the specific places or the specific corners that we know that an action is going to happen over there or we've discussed the potential. More and more nowadays, now that I use Artemis as well, I'm finding I'll suggest framing sometimes. And, you know, I do think that that's kind of important, something because we're only in these spaces for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, sometimes less. So I'll take snaps as well around, you know, we're all kind of just suggesting different ways that things could happen. Take your photos and then you kind of go back to the production office or you go back home and have a proper sit and think about how that space lends itself towards your script and does it work from every aspect that it needs to. After that, I'll start to make mood boards and now I tend to use SketchUp a bit more, but I used to Photoshop entire scenes that would happen. I still do on top of SketchUp as well, but I would take a photo and either draw over it on my iPad or Photoshop scenes and Photoshop. Like I will go get a bed from Google Images that has yellow bedding on it that if it's specific to what I'm thinking, and I'll Photoshop that into the space or change the wallpaper on a wall and kind of create basic enough like concept art, which really helps when you're kind of communicating to your team what you need or what you're thinking. And also to kind of get sign off from directors or producers or to kind of enhance that creative collaboration with them and just make it all very clear and even for myself designing, that kind of is how I design things. I'll play around with different options in the space and see what kind of, just going back to the gut feeling, just kind of what clicks and what you, it is kind of crazy. Sometimes I do think like it is nuts that you just try a load of options until your brain tells you it's the one, and then you go with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You make it sound like a lucky dip or something, but in that process, there is method.
Yeah, totally.
I was going to ask then, in your experience, you've got to work with lots of directors. I hope that all of those experiences have been brilliant, but on the off chance that some of them haven't, I'm curious as to what you think directors can do better or do best to facilitate great production design and kind of empower you to go and do your best work on any job.
I think, I once worked with a director who really loved the art department and understood it, but they were also very experienced in the sense that they saw the value in being clever, in also being clever with where they put their money. I think that experience for me taught me so much, about how if a director can understand that their budget levels mean X, and how do we creatively create the best film and tell the story in the best way that we can while keeping the budget in mind. Because I think ultimately, if you don't have the money for the film that you're making, you can kind of be as creative and dream the most amazing film, but then when the reality hits and when the inevitable realities kind of starts, you can end up with quite a diluted film rather than something that's quite rich, because enough effort and time and money has gone into the things that matter, rather than spreading yourself and your team and your money far too thin, and you end up with quite a diluted end result. That's one thing that I kind of learned from working with a really experienced director. They just knew where to put their money, and could look at the schedule and realize there may be, if they shave off a day in the shooting schedule, because we could amalgamate scenes and be concise in the script and not have too many unnecessary scenes, when that piece of information could be told in one scene, and just add another character instead. Being very clever with kind of the resources and the money that you have, how that can affect the overall production. And yeah, I remember they just did a lot of work on the script and amalgamated scenes and put, were just very clever, and ended up taking a day off the shooting schedule, which, it costs quite a lot to run a film for one day. That money was then put back into the budget, and we could afford to do something that both of us really wanted to do.
I love that.
Yeah, it was great. It was a really great experience. It was just like, wow, okay, this is a very clever person who, can see the overall picture and realize that it's worth more taking away certain things. And you're kind of, you're just moving money really, and you're moving importance and value on certain things in order to just be clever with, I guess, the resources that you have.
Yeah, I think it's great. It's an ongoing negotiation. I think there's nothing worse than, just because a decision has been made that we're going to shoot for 25 days and this is the budget and our department only gets this, to not rethink that if you can do it in 24 and facilitate ultimately a better film is crazy. So
yeah, totally.
You Are Not My Mother and Sunlight were both made through the POV scheme. So there is a budgetary limit and challenge with those films. When you're talking about kind of bringing a director's expectation to life while working within those constraints, how do you do that? Or does it in that instance become your job or part of your job to begin managing their expectations?
Yeah, I think it's always part of your job to manage the expectations of the people that you're working with, because I think ultimately You are the person that knows what what the capabilities are of your team, what the capabilities are with the budget that you're working with, and the restrictions that you're kind of met with. You're the person that is in charge of that. So they're not going to know, like they're not going to know what costs what is feasible, what isn't feasible, because that at the end of the day is your job. So you are always managing expectations of the people that you're working with. When it comes to Sunlight and You Are Not My Mother, I look back on that and I'm like, wow, you were a trooper in comparison to, like, I guess the budgets and amount of crew that I would work with now. You Are Not My Mother, we were kind of very lucky in the sense that we had, like, there was an incredible team put together on You Are Not My Mother. Everybody was so talented and worked so hard, and they were hungry to make a really good film. I think in the art department budget, we had 6,000 all in for everything in the film. So that would kind of cover hand props, dressing props for sets, paints, wallpapers, action vehicles.
Damn.
Everything for 6,000. And I would think I was really lucky. I had an amazing art director who is a good friend of mine, and she was also really hungry to make this film. So the two of us we just stuck at it, and I was only actually talking about this last night to some friends, like me and her, for the entire shooting period. We lived together. Luckily, she had a spare room in her house, and I moved up to Dublin with her, and we lived together for that film. And I didn't drive, and she did drive. So really, I wouldn't have been able to make that film if it wasn't for her, because there was so many logistical things that, needed to happen. And she was just fully on board and fully engaged in the project as much as I was. So the two of us kind of were in it together, making everything. I think we had a buyer for 2 days out of the whole job, so we were both buying, but there was not that much money to spend. So really, we were borrowing and stealing. And also, to put another thing on top of all that, we were in level 5 lockdown, so no shops were even open. This was kind of like the heat of COVID 2020, like October 2020, I think. So we were on Facebook, like, groups, asking if anybody had any furniture that they could give us, any spare wallpapers. I remember going to someone's house that we had met on Facebook, and this woman's mother had passed away like 2 or 3 years before that, and her entire attic was filled to the brim with her mother's furniture and other things that she had kept, and she was going to throw them out in a dump. And we just took everything, and that kind of, like, a lot of that really filled up the main house, which is where we were in it for a good chunk of the film. And I think it took up like half of the shooting days as well. And like every room in the house was a set. And I do think without that woman, we would have had a more of an empty set than what we had. But that was just pure potluck. But, like, yeah, we were climbing in people's attics. We were, buying props in Centra. Like, it was crazy. Trying to make a film in level 5 lockdown with access to nothing.
And such a small amount of money as well. But there's also, I think, something innate in the Irish industry that we can make films look like so much more money because we're so used to not having massive budgets. More people are starting on those either self-financing or maybe 8 to 10 grand county council bursary films. So you learn to solve problems really creatively as opposed to with money.
Totally. And I think also coming straight out of college, doing that film, like, it was like a couple of months after I had graduated. Actually, I think I graduated from college on You Are Not My Mother. I remember painting sets and watching my graduation on like a live, because it was COVID, it was like a live Zoom event while painting the sets. but I still had that kind of scrappy production designer, like college, like you don't have a lot of money when you're a student, so you have to make do with what you can. Yeah, like I still had that in me. So it was the best project for me in order to like step up into feature filmmaking. And I do think I was the right person for that job because there was so much to create with not a lot of money. And I had just been practicing doing that for 4 years, you know?
So what has been your biggest design challenge to date, and how did you solve it? Maybe it was that, but maybe there's something else.
There's a movie coming out. I'm not allowed to talk about it, but it was the biggest budget that I've ever worked with. And managing that size of a team was really interesting. I had 38 people on my team, all in, and the scale of the sets that we were making and the kind of scale of the movie, that has been the biggest challenge for me so far. And I absolutely loved it. I adored every single day. It was the best film I've ever been on in my life. And actually a lot of the crew said it was also the best film that they've ever been on. So I think it was a great vibe to begin with, but just managing that many people. And obviously like what I was saying earlier, you'd have your core kind of HOD team with you and they would have their own teams. So they are in a sense managing their own teams as well. But I guess there's just so much coordination. There's so much to think about on a daily basis. And there's so much at stake when you're dealing with that level of budget and being trusted with that level of budget, So the pressure goes up, but I think it was I really wish I could talk about it because it was such an amazing film.
I would like to just go back and acknowledge for a moment when you mentioned, I know we can't talk about the film, but 38 people on your team, like that is a small, medium-sized enterprise. It's an SME that you are running within this larger organization. You're like a subsidiary. So
Totally.
for anyone who isn't aware, like, which is what we touched on at the beginning, in terms of how good you have to be at communicating and leading a team and not just building a world, but creating an environment in which all of those people are willing to dig in deep for you.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's nuts. It is absolutely nuts. And but I also do think, I like to think that everybody on the team takes a lot of pride in their own work, and you kind of do see that across the board. So they are, of course, digging into the production designer's overall vision, or, digging into the director's vision. But ultimately, I do hope that everybody on the team shows up and does it for themselves and their own kind of. And I do love doing kind of creative artistic films because there's such a kick out of talking in the art department about what this could be and what the possibilities are of each thing, and seeing the team get excited about certain things. I'm luckily in a position now where I have a core team of people that I've met that I would consider, friends and are very talented artists in their own right. And it's so refreshing working with them, and they bring so much to the table, So I do like the team. Your team is everything. It's absolutely everything. The talent and the dedication and the drive of your team is what makes the art department good and is what makes the production design good. But yeah, that was a lot of team, and it was the best because everyone was so good at their job. Everyone was so talented, and just the production went so well because all the cogs in the wheel were spinning perfectly and everybody brought so much to the table. And yeah, it was just the most refreshing job ever.
Well, when it's out and you can talk about it, we'll do another one of these where we look just at that film.
Just at that film, I'd love to. It was so good.
Are there design challenges that you have yet to encounter that you would love to tackle? Any particular genres or particular type of worlds or just design challenges that you would love to get your hand on?
I would love to do, I think for me, set building in a studio is next. I would love to start from scratch. I have done set builds before, but like an entire apartment or, you know, things that require certain rigs of falling walls or, you know, I would love to just do studio builds. I think that's next for me on the kind of goals, I guess.
I love that you are talking about physically building things and not letting that be in a digital or CG space.
No, myself and my housemate, we, you know, we're keeping up to date with kind of the technological advances of AI and specifically like Sora and the video generating. It's kind of terrifying. Like it's terrifying. I get quite excited about in-house practical camera effects. And I don't know, maybe does that come from the theater background? I'm not sure. Or, you know, doing theater while I was growing up, but there is something quite nice about doing things kind of practically in camera. And that's not to say that VFX isn't cool. Like it opens up so many different opportunities from a world building perspective as well. If it's incorporated right. But yeah, I would love to just design a space from scratch and work with, you know, art directors and you know, a construction team in a studio making something from scratch. That's definitely where I would like to go next. I think I don't think there's anything you know, it's not too daunting because, you know, once you crew the right people and once you have the right brains in the room, like you can do anything just through collaboration, through communication and proper planning and prep. And the idea of seeing something from, I mean, it's not a feeling that I'm not used to, but seeing something come from an idea, then down on paper, and then physically built as a 3D space around you, you know, that is very exciting. I would love to do period. Like I've done period films, but I'd love to go further back in time and learn, you know, about those time periods. And I think that's definitely something that I want to do. There's nothing really that I don't want to do, you know, and I feel like I hope through the career I will get to try, not if not all, I'll get to try quite a lot of the different types of genres and different worlds to build, you know?
Given the trajectory you are currently on, I would say it will absolutely be the case.
Thanks.
If you can pick a time period, what is the time period you go and design?
I'd love to try the 70s, but like 70s America, I think there's something really interesting in that. I've designed the 80s quite a bit. I've done a few jobs set in the 80s, and that also was a fun time period. But I'd really love to go back even like to medieval times. Wow. I'm currently rewatching Game of Thrones. And I remember when I was 18, I want to say, I was in first year college. I got a train up to Belfast. I think I had watched the series for the first time, and I had got a train up to Belfast with a couple of college friends to go see a talk and meet with the production designer of Game of Thrones, Deborah Riley. And that blew my mind. I remember as a little 18-year-old, like, you know, talking to her and, you know, listening to her, because Game of Thrones is an interesting one. You have so many different worlds within the one world, and how she navigated that and her influences and the parts of the world that they went to. That's another thing that's so exciting about this job, is the potential traveling aspect, you know, and maybe getting a movie that's over in the other side of the world and going to that part of the world, learning about that culture, working with crew members from that country or wherever you are, and making art in another part of the world. I just think there's so many opportunities with this job. It's so exciting. But yeah, she went all over the world to shoot, because there's like snow scenes that are in the depths of snow, or like sets that are in really hot climates, and a lot of it was shot up in Ireland. I think that's kind of a fun aspect of the series, because you can see so much of our country in it, but our country is so beautiful to shoot in, the landscapes, and I can completely see why so many people come here to make films, because the landscape is so beautiful.
And we have deadly crews.
And we have deadly crew. That's another thing about this film, about this industry that I love, is that if you're not sound and if you're not easy to work with, you just tend to not really get hired again, which means that most people you work with are sound and lovely and are hardworking, which just makes for a really nice time in work. Do you know what I mean? Like, everybody is just there because they're good at their job, they're sound, and they're easy to work with. So you just work with like people that are great. It's so nice.
Yeah. What's your favorite part of being a designer?
I do think it is world building. I think when you visualize a space and see it come to reality, and that process, I think the process is quite nice as well. But I do think it's hard to say what my favorite part is, because I kind of do love all of it. There's something really exciting about getting things over the line that were potentially not going to be a reality due to budget constraints or XYZ. And then when it comes to reality, and when you get it over the line and it's there and they've captured it and it's in the can, that feeling is incredible. Definitely. I think there's a real rush to making films, because you're working with such a tight schedule. Things can't go wrong. You have to be on your A game at all times and turn around things really quickly. So there's always that kind of like that focus that you have to keep up.
We may have touched on this already, but what's the best piece of advice you've been given?
In terms of advice, like, I've been very lucky with the mentors that I have. I have 3 or 4 different either production designers or other experienced kind of crew members that I would consider mentors. And I will say that that has been instrumental to my learning and development. Having good, solid crew around you that support you and wish you well and are a phone call away if something is needed or if advice is needed. So I am lucky. I do think I've been given so much advice over the last few years that it's hard to say which is the best piece of advice that I've been given. But I will say that just having those mentors as a lifeline is, yeah, so great.
Is there a worst piece of career advice you've been given?
Actually, no, not that I can think of right now. I'm sure there is, but you kind of have to see where that advice is coming from. And yeah, no, I don't think I have an answer for that one.
I think that answer that you just gave is a great answer, though, because it's so important to take context into account. As what is good advice for one person may be bad advice for another. It depends on where you are in a particular moment and how that advice comes to you. So
totally. Yeah, totally. And yeah, who it comes from. Context is everything. Like, yeah, completely. And you can kind of see maybe someone who has fallen out of love with the film industry, and you can kind of see that advice is coming from a certain place, and being able to kind of see through that and acknowledge what is good advice and what is not. And I do think I get quite a lot of advice because I'm young And I appreciate that so much. You know, people are more willing to help than you'd expect. Like, you just need to ask. People are so willing to help. And in turn, I'm so willing to help other people that are coming up. You know, like I'll meet for people with for coffee and give them advice on how to get into the film industry, how to build their portfolio, how to behave on set, collaborating, all that kind of thing, because there is people that are doing it for me. And I think that's kind of how the whole film industry works, really. You know, we all lift each other up and bring up the next generation of filmmakers in the same way that we were by the generation above us, which is quite nice, you know.
I do think the Irish industry is incredibly generous in that regard.
Totally. And we're so lucky to have the likes of, you know, the Screen Ireland POV scheme and all the schemes that Screen Ireland do, and the support networks that we have today. Like, you know, there's so many different initiatives like the likes of X-Pollinator or the Screen Ireland POV schemes that are, you know, helping to bring up and coming filmmakers to the next level and to educate each other. We're very lucky that we have these kind of schemes put in place. So I agree with you. I do think the Irish film industry is naturally very good at supporting the next generation of filmmakers and bringing each other up, which is lovely.
When you offer advice to upcoming filmmakers, what is, in your opinion and experience, the most important piece of advice that you would share with someone who wants to work in production design or within your department?
I would say, you know, the types of things that I was taught when I was starting off was you just have to really dedicate yourself. You know, you have to show up when you're on set. You know, your time is everything in this industry. And I think, you know, even down to like being on time, making sure that you're on time for things, that you aren't handing up deliverables late, you are asking the right questions, applying yourself to your portfolio, you know, to practice your hard skills, because inevitably they are what is going to quicken you up and help you to convey your idea visually and help you grow yourself as a designer. Doing research, like researching time periods, reading books, going to libraries, going to see films, that is a huge thing. You know, you learn so much from watching films and understanding the visual language that, you know, the filmmakers are using in order to convey the messages that they're trying to give and the story that they're trying to tell. So I think watching films and getting out there, really getting out onto the field, like it's easier than you think to build a portfolio. I mean, granted, I did go to college and had, you know, access to opportunities there, which allowed me to build my portfolio. You know, like building your portfolio and putting yourself out there, you know, looking up the different production companies, the different production designers that you are inspired by, reaching out to them, going for a coffee, you know, buying them a coffee and picking their brains and putting in the work yourself in order to get, I really do believe that the more work you put into it, the more that you'll get out of it. You would be surprised by how much you can get out of putting yourself out there, you know, and making your own opportunities for yourself, really, instead of waiting for them to happen to you.
All killer advice.
I mean, it's true. It is very true. Like, I definitely feel like I built my portfolio on my Instagram, and what I really started to do was follow filmmakers with the portfolio built on my Instagram, and follow the filmmakers that those filmmakers were following, you know, and then, you know, they would see my work. It's kind of like using social media for what it should be used for in some sense, you know, and social networking.
It's your storefront, right?
Totally. Yeah. Oh, totally. Totally. And, you know, it's nice because the film industry, there's a certain aspect to it that's quite colloquial. I would say Instagram kind of lends itself towards that feeling as well, when you're just casually following someone and they can look at your work if they want or not, or, rather than a hard email. And there's that certain level of expectation to get back to them or to look at their work. Or, I mean, not to say you shouldn't email. I've done that too, and I still do that, email people that I would love to work with or keep in touch. I just think Instagram is a nice one to use, kind of ticking away in the background almost. And it definitely helped me start off. I think I was working with film students and then putting all that work online, and people could see that, the people that I was working with. And then that's when the professional work kind of started, from using that shop front, like you said.
Are there any recommended resources or reads that have influenced you?
My auntie over in LA, her good friend used to work in the art department there. And I think she left the art department, but then still continued. She was still signed up to the Art Directors Guild. And they would send her, like, biannually, I think, maybe quarter annually, a magazine about everything to do with the art department or the set deck department in Los Angeles specifically, but also just the world in general. And I have stacks of these magazines now, which have been a godsend. They're so interesting. They talk about everything to do with the film from an art department's perspective. And yeah, they're so rich. So I'm lucky that I have those magazines coming in every time I see my auntie who comes over from LA. She'll bring them with her. And yeah, they're so nice to read. And very inspiring, to see the art department broken down on like massive scale projects and seeing how much work goes into every single thing. There's so much work that goes into everything in the department, every decision. Filmmaking in general, like, I think it's so easy for people, I guess, that aren't in the industry to watch a film and think, oh, they found that location or they found that set, just naturally due to ignorance, whereas in fact every single thing that you see in frame is a decision that has been made and probably talked about at length. But in terms of other visual resources, like, I genuinely think watching films, like, we have access to any film ever online, the internet you can use for anything. And I think just watching films and lots of different types of films, just to broaden your own research and your own bank. Like, it helps as well when you're speaking about films to a director, or you're speaking about your film that you're making, and being able to reference other films that gave a certain feeling that you're trying to create yourselves. It's just really good to have your own bank of references that you can pull from during conversation when you're trying to come up with an idea together. For mood boards and for kind of, designing yourself, there's websites that I use. Magnum Photography is great. Shot Deck, Flim AI, Pinterest. I use Pinterest quite a lot. Before I knew about the other websites, I would only use Pinterest. But I think it's quite good because it's kind of like Instagram in the sense that it's like real people and real world. So when I'm really trying to authentically get into designing an authentic space, like when I'm trying to design a real world authentic space, I find Pinterest is quite good because, you can look up things that it's photography from other people's accounts that are real people as well, rather than refined screen grabs from a film that's quite constructed. Do you get me? So it's more of an everyday feeling to the photography that's on Pinterest. And it's also great the way that the app is laid out. Like, you click in one image and you scroll down and there's a million other images that look exactly like that, or different variations. So, if I like a certain lamp, I can like find that on Pinterest and then go down and find other variations of that lamp or variations of that space that might be better suited to what I'm thinking. you could spend hours visually researching for a film, and making mood boards. And I do think that part of the design process is going through all of these online like websites and reading also books. Like, we have a lot of in my house here, we have a lot of different, photography books, coffee table books that are on certain specific things. When I'm doing a film, I would also go to the library and find relevant books on those films, because they're like mini theses. Books, someone's dedicated so much of their time and life into creating this book, and there's so much research gone into it. It's a bit more substantial almost than just fleeting articles and things like that online, if you get me.
Yeah.
So books are a great one, and the library is free.
Always good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. But yeah, I think that would be kind of it in terms of like visual, like researching. Magnum photography is really great. There's some beautiful photography there. And obviously like Film AI is insane, because it's AI generated, I think. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but there's on Shot Deck, it's like TV and film, whereas Film AI has TV, commercials, music videos, film, videos. Like there's so much on Film, and similar to Pinterest, you can click on one thing and it'll give you 10 different options that look visually similar to that. So there's a culmination of different resources that you would use in prep while making a film, and yeah, they're all kind of just part of the process, really.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for talking to me. That has been deadly. I will say, Marian Kelly, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
And that's a wrap on Lauren Kelly and Season 1 of the Filmmaker's Playbook. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the show, please follow and rate us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have feedback, questions, or topics you'd like me to cover on the show, please put them in the comments section on our Instagram page at the Filmmaker's Playbook Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at Jason Branagan Director. You can follow Lauren on Instagram at Lauren Kelly Designer. Links and social media handles are in the show notes. The Filmmaker's Playbook will be back for Season 2 on October 9th, so stay tuned.